With the Winnipeg Jets off for at least a day, let's check in on the rest of the crazy NHL trade market and how it'll impact the Jets. All coming right up on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now to get started. Now, like I said, the Jets right now are kind of in a weird pattern where, the past few months of play have been a little bit substandard, generally speaking. Still winning plenty of games, but obviously how the Jets have done that hasn't exactly been as inspiring as I think a lot of us would like, right? But that's okay. You're going to go through patches where maybe your 5v5 play dips and stuff like that. What's really important is to think about the long term, and with the trade deadline coming up, the Jets have a really good opportunity to kind of rewrite the ship and get things back on track. But obviously, the market right now is kind of all over the place. We've seen some interesting trades, like the Elias Lindholm one was pretty decent, I would say, but maybe not the most exciting for the Flames. And then, of course, Sean Monahan comes to the Jets for a first rounder and a conditional, fourth rounder. So some early big forwards got moved. But now it sounds like the forward market might be getting more expensive. Apparently, some of the asking prices, especially for wingers, has been pretty high. Jake Guentzel, the rumor is at least 2 firsts or a first and another A-caliber prospect, which, given how good Guentzel is not surprising. I will say that is pretty expensive if it's just like a rental. And look, if you're trading away 2 firsts, right, I would usually like that package to be for a player who truly moves the needle and maybe even has a little bit more term, because you'd probably be looking at a little more added on to the rest of that package. But if that is what wingers are going for right now, the Jets might be in the market more for a middle sixer then, right? Somebody who's perhaps a player that's of quality and certainly brings, maybe a 40 to 50 point scoring range, maybe 60 points if you're really, really fortunate somehow, but in that kind of price range, right? Maybe not a Jake Guentzel or something, which for Winnipeg would be pretty affordable, I would think. You don't have to go and get a Buchnevich, although as much as I love that idea, I think it's pretty unrealistic. Butch would be, oh man, he'd be like the absolute stud for this team, and I'd be super down. But I don't think that's really all that likely, and I've tried to not really think about it too much because this team doesn't usually make deals like that. We did it once or twice. Then we had, of course, Paul Stastny, who re-signed for a couple of years. But since then, the Jets really haven't acquired too many top-end forwards that I would say are really worth getting excited about. Usually the Jets add in that middle 6 range, and if the prices for higher end players are really that crazy, well, then maybe the Jets are going to be a little bit more conservative, which does concern me a little bit. Thankfully, the last few deadlines, I feel like the Jets have actually picked up some pretty decent players. Nemesnikov and Niederreiter have been very good adds, and of course, both of them have signed extensions previously with the Jets, so that's great. But in terms of other options, right, you're looking at sort of the Tatars, maybe the Nyquists. There's a few others, of course. I talked about yesterday, Mantha being an option. Konechny, kind of in the dream state. I would say Buchnevich also falls in the dream category. But hey, nice to have dreams, nice to have goals. Are they going to happen? Probably not, but maybe there's a small outside chance that somehow something squeaks through and the Jets get really fortunate. But I think for the most part, Winnipeg's going to be doing a little bit more bargain bin shopping. It sounds like the D market is definitely a little bit on the hotter side because one of the biggest names, Sean Walker, is now talking extensions with the Flyers. And it sounds like there really is just some debate over the term. The average annual value they seem to have settled upon, but it's the term that continues to be a little bit of a sticking point for the Flyers. Now, this could be one of two things. Either the Flyers really aren't seeing that much value on the market and think that keeping Walker is honestly just better than whatever trade assets they get, or they're really trying to drive up the prices and put pressure on a market that now is already missing of course, Chris Tanev, who was the biggest rental out there, and quite frankly, didn't go for all that much. In fact, I'd say he went under what I was expecting. So if they're trying to really force teams' hands with a big Sean Walker trade push, threatening a longer-term contract is certainly a way to do it. Maybe they just really like Walker, and he's put up pretty respectable numbers for them. So I could see that being the case, but I feel like with where the Flyers are and what they need, it's probably more important to invest in the future rather than trying to hang on to a core it's talented, but it's not exactly there for like a real contender, right? And Walker's not at the point of his career where I feel like keeping him at this stage is maybe the best use of that space. Not that he's a bad player or would be bad, but it's more like you need to leave yourself some flexibility and stuff and start to think about the longer term picture because, Couturier is not getting younger. A lot of their players are more on the veteran side. You've got some really good young talent in guys like Forster and, of course, Frost, who's really earned his role with the team. But yeah, I don't know about that one. That's a weird situation. But my guess is that this is probably more to put pressure on the trade market, which for the Jets is not ideal. I do wonder if the Jets are going to go for like a Nick Seeler type or something like that. A lot of teams are in on Seeler. A lot of teams are in on Walker. And if that causes a trade war, I can't say that I love that for the Jets. So Winnipeg might be better off shopping somewhere else. Maybe this is when you go revisit that Van Riemsdyk discussion with the Caps, right? You bring in Mantha and TVR, and things look pretty decent if you can make that trade work. Maybe part of the salary going back would involve Nate Schmidt returning back to Washington on top of a pretty decent prospect and picks package because you've got some term with TVR. He signed to a really team-friendly deal if you're the Jets, and he could, anchor that third pairing role nicely. So a lot of options for the Jets, but Winnipeg probably has to start making decisions soon because with all these teams kind of competing for the same 5 players and the market not exactly having a lot of time to make decisions, the Jets are going to want to play their cards right and just be careful with not getting into any crazy bidding wars. I think Monahan was a really smart ad for the price that they paid. It's more like in the hindsight being 2020 thing, but he's actually a gamble that's paid off. So I don't mind that so much. I think he's done, he's already worth whatever they paid, which, was just a late first rounder. So really can't be too upset. We're hoping they pay a 4th round pick because that means the Jets won the cup, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. One other interesting thing to note, and it kind of relates to what I'm about to talk about in just a moment, is that Markstrom apparently is not going to be traded. That's the rumor, which for a lot of teams out there who were looking for a top-end goaltender, they're probably panicking right now because Markstrom is really the best trade option, and there aren't many other names that can elevate a team in goals. So very fun, very interesting, and suddenly all those teams that said they didn't want to give Connor Hellebuyck a big contract extension if they acquired him this past offseason, well, they might be regretting that a lot. Now, I did say that I wanted to talk about Hellebuyck specifically because he's having one of the craziest seasons in his entire career, and I feel like it's gone slightly under the radar. We'll focus on Hellebuyck in just a moment and why this season should be one to savor. But before we go any further, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Obviously, right now, it's a great time for all of you basketball fans, and you can get big buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. A lot of you probably do watch the NBA. I personally do not. It's just a sport that I've not personally gotten into, but I'll tune in for the playoffs. I find those to be really fun. I know some of the top stars, LeBron, Giannis, Jokic, and some of the other guys who are really impressive and really continuing to push the skill level forward. I mean, we've seen some crazy playoff runs, and honestly, it's a great time. But for a lot of you who might be even more into the sport than I am, you can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. Maybe you'll hit a half-court shot, right? We all would love that. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are focusing in a little bit on some stuff around the Jets, maybe some trade market stuff, and also kind of maybe thinking about Cole Perfetti and Connor Hellebuyck. And I wanted to start off with Connor Hellebuyck because he's the happy discussion to have, right? And I think a lot of people are maybe sleeping on just how good this season from Hellebuyck has been. It is quite honestly the best season of his career, even above the year that he won the Vezina and also above the year that he was a Vezina finalist. He's had a couple of those. Easy to forget he was a finalist twice. Pretty crazy, right? But before we get into Hellebuyck's amazing performance this year, just wanted to talk about something really cool Locked On has done. We have launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and we're now available on the free Fire TV channels app on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today is here for you all day, covering the top sports stories of the day with our local experts and our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or on the free Fire TV channels app. Now, like I said, the Jets are kind of in an interesting state because past couple of months, the Jets have kind of had to lean up a little bit more on Connor Hellebuyck's performance, which, considering he was already having one of the greatest seasons of his entire career, you'd be comfortable doing that, but maybe not as much as the Jets have been doing recently. I think that's perhaps a point of concern going forward. But in the meantime, right, let's just enjoy the Connor Hellebuyck ride because this dude has put up one of the craziest seasons we've ever seen from him. Going through Money Puck's goals saved above expectation, which, as it sounds like, it's really just a calculation of how many chances a team has conceded and how many the goalie has saved above expectation in terms of expected goal differential. And Connor, he's like running away with the Vezina trophy if it were to be awarded with this stat, right? He saved 31.3 goals above expectation, which is like 12 more than the next closest competition in both Jacob Markstrom and Thatcher Demko. So to put it in context, right, we've not really seen many stretches of any goalie do this for an entire season. Like 15 to 20 goals above expectation for an entire year would actually be pretty decent, right? Especially as we're kind of running into the latter stages of this regular season. And goaltending this year hasn't exactly been great. The average save percentage has dipped quite a bit. And where a lot of teams are lucky if they get 9-10 save percentages every night, the Jets are getting like 930s, 920s, crazy stuff from Hellebuyck, right? What I think is especially wild this year is that given what the Jets are expected to concede, he has somehow bottomed out even in like the number of concessions he's had this year compared to previous seasons. He just isn't giving teams anything, and it's been one of the most special performances in net. I don't really want to talk about it just from a statistical standpoint because I feel like that could get a little bit boring, right? It's more about the way that he's managed to sort of catalyze this team from goal outwards and really been the key centerpiece of this entire defense, right? The Jets' defensive structure has improved a lot. They've gotten really stingy collectively as a team. I know the first line recently has kind of changed that narrative a bit, but overall, the team, generally speaking, very stingy, especially before Connor came back. So in a lot of ways, Hellebuyck has kind of been the unifying force there where anything that does get through, and the Jets do concede a fair few number of chances, well, he is backstopping almost everything. He's putting up an incredible season. He, at this point, is my absolute favorite for the Vezina. I really don't think anyone else comes close. Even the top performers and guys like Markstrom and Demko just aren't quite doing it as well as he is. Helly is just a model of a consistent goaltender, and the closest thing I can really think of is what we used to see with Henrik Lundqvist, right? Lundy every year was one of the top goalies in the entire league. Unfortunately, never had a cup ring to show for it. He got close, but, no cigar. And I think that'll probably be at least one small regret for his career. I say small, it's, obviously a little bit more impactful than that. But from the perspective of Hellebuyck, right? Helly is really knocking on the doors of not only the Hall of Fame, but also of a Stanley Cup ring. That's why I've really felt like this year has to be the year, because I don't know that he's ever going to put up these crazy numbers again. This season from Helly, among the best in NHL history, among the best in his own personal history, and I really feel like Winnipeg has to come away with some sort of title out of this. If they don't get a run, a real cup run out of this year's squad, it's going to be a huge disappointment, and I think the Jets would really feel like they missed a tremendous opportunity. It's not to say that next season's Hellebuyck isn't going to be really good, because there's a great chance he will be, like, again, another Vezina contender. But I think considering what we've seen from him in past years and what he's put up this season, this year, he's just on a different planet. I really feel like, that big, bold style that he embodies with the smooth, controlled movements and stuff, and the way that he's able to just really calmly swallow pucks up has been a godsend for this team. I think it's been a fantastic fit, and I just hope that, for the next few years, right, of his contract, which is probably when we're going to start to see, age-related declines start to set in, after the next 2 to 3 seasons. Somewhere in there, let's just hope that there's a championship title. He deserves it. He has been really our anchoring presence in net, and I really feel like of all the players that I really desperately want on this team to get a ring, it's got to be Helly at or near the top. Josh Morrissey also way up there. So a lot of players, I would kill to see hoist a cup at least somewhere in their careers, and Helly for me would at least be one of them. But remains to be seen, right? The Jets need to do some work sometime either this weekend or during next week's trade deadline scramble. Let's hope that Winnipeg comes up with something really big. And of course, we'll have coverage on all of Winnipeg's roster moves and maybe some other trade discussions throughout the coming days. So stay tuned for that next week. But of course, one particular name that I'm seeing more and more frequently, and I've actually seen in some of the comments, is Cole Perfetti being perhaps discussed as a trade candidate. And I wanted to talk about why I think trading him right now, especially, is a really bad idea. I know Perfetti has struggled recently. I know that you'll look at his recent offensive contributions and think, why would we really want to take that much time and be patient with him when we can turn him into a roster player who might fit the Jets now? And, well, that's partially true. But let's talk about the longer term and why Perfetti really should be one of those players the Jets factor in as part of their long-term plans. All coming right up in just a moment. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Game Time. When it comes to buying tickets, we all know how much of a pain it can be. We often get hit with surprise charges, lots of fees, and look, no one wants to spend like $700 just to see a 3-hour concert or sporting event, right? You want to have fun, but you don't want to go broke. And Game Time totally understands the frustration and struggle. That's why they offer killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and so much more. Part of that so much more includes views from the venue. So you actually know that when you're buying a seat, you can actually see roughly what your perspective is, so that you're not buying blindly, because no one wants to go sit at an arena or a rink or something and find out that they can't see past a giant pillar that's 2 feet in front of them, right? The Game Time folks have probably gone through the same thing, and that's why they want to take all the guesswork out of buying tickets. And of course, like I said, they want to save you time and money with lots of handy features, and they also come back with the lowest price guarantee and event cancellation protection. So if you want to make the process of buying tickets as smooth as possible, go with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, just create an account, and when you're doing so, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode, as we are just wrapping up with some interesting conversations that we've recently seen around the struggling Cole Perfetti. And, I think this has been one of the most complicated discussions for this season that a lot of folks have kind of picked a couple of different sides with. I think that there's a lot of frustration with his performance, and also a lot of folks who are saying, let's pump the brakes on getting too upset about things and kind of play it by ear and see what happens, right? Perfetti for me is one of those guys who, he's a really high skilled player. He's brilliant. He's probably the smartest hockey player we've ever drafted. And that's saying a lot because you have guys like Ehlers and Scheifele who are brilliant inside the offensive zone, but Perfetti just sees things at a level that not many other players in this league or even in the sport period can do. Like he just has eyes in the back of his head, and his vision and spatial awareness can often be astoundingly good. Recently, though, things have been a little bit more suboptimal, I would say. He's had a couple of issues with some loose turnovers, some puck management, and the dry spell recently offensively, I'm sure, has been a real sticking point for him. I think the thing with Perfetti, though, that people have to remember is he's played a sum total of 127 career NHL games. That's really not very much. He had last season derailed by a huge injury. This year, he's finally stayed healthy. And guess what? He has as many points this year as he did last year, and he's still got time to add to those totals. Last year, it was more assist heavy. This year, he's added around 6 more goals, which is nice. We know that his finishing talent was something that a lot of folks in the junior ranks were really praising. So if you prorate his season performance, he'd be hovering around 40 points, which is like a solid mid-tier player. Recently, though, I've seen some interesting conversations, not involving Perfetti, but about the league in general, that the NHL, just generally speaking, is getting way tougher. The skill barrier that sits at the top of the league is making it such that, a lot of young players who initially are coming into these leagues, if you're not blessed like Matthews or McDavid was, you're going to struggle. And I think Perfetti has kind of had issues at times with some of that, but he's only 22. He's like a super stud-like player with great ambitions, great skill, and the Jets really should just be patient with him. The only thing that I'm kind of concerned about longer term is whether the coaching staff starts to alienate him because I think his agent was expecting a bigger role this year, and from Perfetti's own conversations, I think he wanted that bigger role too. And instead, it kind of feels like he's been, mixed about the lineup and not really had a consistent place that he can call his own. Recently, he started playing with Nemesnikov on the fourth line, and that's actually been pretty good. I know yesterday's game he had a rough turnover that got turned into a goal against, and I'm sure a lot of folks were upset about that. They'll probably use that as ammunition that he needs less ice time, and he's too young and needs to get sent down. But the thing is, with the amount of turnovers the Jets make, Winnipeg honestly just is a turnover machine, right? Our puck management in that game yesterday was appalling. I think if Perfetti was just one of many who had really bad plays that turned into goals against, it's really not fair to single him out necessarily because he's actually not making a lot of plays like that. Generally speaking, he's defensively responsible. He's very careful with his passes. So when a mistake like that happens, it's more surprising than it is routine. I think the other thing with him is that when he actually does create chances, he's mostly just been a little bit unlucky. Either his line mates haven't been able to capitalize on a good opportunity, or a puck has just sailed wide or just been deflected wide or saved from a great angle by a goalie, just trickling the puck wide of net. So in a lot of areas, Perfetti is doing many of the small things correctly. It's just not working out for him like it did earlier this season when he had, 13 points in 15 games? I think trading him now would be a mistake because he is a guy that's one of the smartest players this team will likely ever draft, and you could actually build a line around him. I think he's a brilliant player. I think he's super skilled, and you just need to be patient with him and let him find his game a little bit, right? I don't think a demotion to the Moose is necessarily going to help. I think, if anything, it could actually put him in a bit of a spiral, right? He's too good for the AHL level. We know that for sure. His skill level is very high. And to anyone who says that the AHL league is a developmental league, it's just not. It doesn't really help players progress as much as I think people imagined it to. It's more of just a really tough pro league. And sometimes you can actually struggle and not really get yourself out of spots there. But I also think the quality of competition Cole would face really doesn't match what his skill sets dictate, right? Some of those opponents would be a little too easy for him to pass around. And, you're also going to face a lot more physicality and some probably dirtier and nastier hits, which, we don't really want to see Perfetti injured. So I think he really needs to play at the highest levels and play with genuine skill, which in limited roles right now, he actually is. But it's just not been perhaps the banner second half of the season that I think a lot of people wanted. But again, if you trade him now when his value is A, kind of on the lower side, and B, at a state where you're going to struggle to find a player that's going to be a long-term addition that you can really rely upon. I think you're making a mistake. I think it's going to be like a Morgan Frost situation where if you just let him kind of work through some of the stuff, rebuild his confidence, and get back to it, he's going to reward you handsomely, and you're going to think, wow, a couple seasons from now, why did we ever consider trading Cole Perfetti? I think there are a lot of other assets that the Jets should investigate first before they turn to trading Perfetti. If it continues for like another 2 years and he really just doesn't seem like he's turning it around, fine, we can revisit the conversation. But when you're talking about a 22-year-old player who's played less than 200 NHL games and has all of the skill and potential to be a star at this level, just be patient, let him get through it. And, I think in a few seasons, we'll be laughing about this and thinking, oh, how did we ever doubt his ability to really control games? He is a brilliant player. I think he'll bounce out of this, and I'm very excited for his future as a Jet. I think it's also really important for the Jets to continue to develop him and keep him because that's something Winnipeg hasn't really done with a lot of their star picks. We've seen a number of players depart over the years, and it'd be nice if we could actually retain at least one of these first rounders, especially in the wake of some of the stuff like Laine going. Now, the Jets did luck out that they ended up getting Dubois in that trade because they turned Dubois into Velarde and Iafallo and Kupari, but the odds of that ever happening again, pretty low. So, if you're going to be a draft and develop team, then you need to stick by it. And that includes some rough patches like what we're seeing with some of our young players like Perfetti. But I do have a lot of faith and confidence that he'll work through it. I think he's going to be a long-term name that Jets fans are going to love for a very long time. And I hope that at some point down the road, whether it's this year or in the future, he's also got a ring to add to his impressive collection of plays and passes. So a lot to consider, but I think it'd be a little premature to start talking about Perfetti trade stuff unless you're of the mindset that, the Jets are never going to be the team that gives him ice time, which, yeah, you might worry about that a little bit, but I'm just not going to reach that stage yet. I don't want to hit the panic button too early. I am one of the folks who's going to be a little more patient and hope for his turnaround. I mean, we've given Logan Stanley like 6 billion years to figure it out, and he's still kind of been the same player that he's generally been throughout much of his career. So why rush Perfetti now? Let's just be patient and see how the cookie crumbles. But let me know what you think in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. Obviously, this weekend, the Jets will be facing the Carolina Hurricanes. Didn't get a chance to talk about them as much, but I think this is a game that's going to be a frustrating one. Hopefully, Winnipeg can squeeze out a win, but man, we really do need to see some lineup changes because I worry that the Jets at even strength are going to have some issues against a Canes team that's very pesky down low and likes to deal with a lot of rebounds. So we'll see how that goes, crossing fingers for gold stars. But like I said, for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Tune in next week for Jets trade coverage and a recap of the Canes game. But again, we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great week, or we'll see you next Monday. Have a great weekend. And as always, go Jets go.